and thank you for tuning in to the continuing series of New Knowledge. My name is Cathy Lowe, and I'm the Executive Director of Virginia Highlands Small Business Incubator. And to my left is Cecile Rosenbaum, who is the Assistant Town Manager with the Town of Abingdon and has been instrumental in helping perfect these company policies and procedures. I know it's a snowy afternoon, and I'm happy that we have live stream capability for you folks. So, I'm going to start with this slideshow, and if anybody in the audience has questions, you can stop me between slides. But, you know, the introduction and purpose of a policies and procedures for your company is really twofold. It gives your management a set of guidelines to go by as things arise. There's always already a policy in place, and of course you don't want those policies to be so rigid that you don't have any flexibility. But when you are writing your policies, the first thing that you should do is give an overview of your company, its mission, and the purpose of creating the manual in the first place. The opening statement should answer the who, what, where, when, and why about your company. And it's very important in the beginning for all of your employees to understand where you're coming from. So, I know that, I don't know if you can see this on the screen. If you'll let Sandy know through a text or through live stream questioning, we'll try to focus in better on this. We put it in a black background to hopefully make it easier to read on live stream, but we're not sure how it comes up, so let us know. So the handbook, a sample of the introduction and the purpose of your handbook. You know, the first bullet point would be that this handbook is designed to acquaint you with information about working conditions, employee benefits, specific policies affecting your employment. Another bullet could be as an employee, you are responsible for reading, understanding, and complying with all the provisions of this handbook. And we'll get to this later, but we are letting people know that this is our operational guidelines, and once you have created your policies and procedures, you would want each employee to sign and date those policies and procedures stating that they understand the terms of the manual. So the manual will describe many but not all of your responsibilities and outline the programs that are developed by your company that benefits your employees. And you're going to state the obvious, which is our objective is to provide a work environment that is conducive to both personnel and professional growth. I'm going to let Cecile take over now.
All right, our next slide deals with the details about your list of objectives. And when you're looking at a handbook, you want it to provide as much information as possible. And when you do this, you want to keep in mind at all times that these handbooks are great for protection on both sides, and that's for the management as well as the employee. And it provides a way for you to have something to go back on if there should be something that comes up that you need to deal with, you know, with an employee. And some of the things that you want to provide information about, and these are just, you know, snapshots of things. They're not all inclusive, and you may want to include more, you may want to include less. One of the things is working conditions, employee benefits, specific policies affecting your employment, and specific responsibilities. And obviously, those types of things, you know, they're pretty open-ended, but you may want to describe things in working conditions. There is a section about accommodations for people with disabilities pursuant to information outlined, and you can find that at www.ada.gov, and that would be the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is a section about workplace discrimination and sexual harassment and bullying Bullying is something that's really in the forefront these days, and if you are unfamiliar with the things that constitute bullying, I would certainly encourage you to seek those out, and there's lots of resources for that. You can also write 2 sections referenced above that refer to the Department of Labor website, and that would be something you would want to do, which is www.dol.gov. Now, employment terms. Do you want to do employment terms?
Okay, so employment terms spells out the employment is either at will, which is also standard Department of Labor language. An example of the sentence would say Virginia is an at-will employment state. Accordingly, your employment with whatever the name of your company is voluntary, and there is no specific length of employment. Either you as an employee or blank as an employer may terminate the relationship at will with or without cause at any time, so long as there is no violation of applicable federal or state laws. Policies set forth in this handbook are not intended to create a contract of employment between blank and any of its employees. The terms can contain different language for employees who have an employment contract, and you should write language that reserves the right to revise, rescind, or supplement any of these policies.
And this is that last one is very important, because I know for us, with an employee manual, it is a constantly changing document. We could probably put a new page in or amend something pretty much every day, depending on the situation. Something that's real important to include is automobile business travel. This is something that is a very important thing for employees who do have to travel for work. The IRS allows a specific amount of mileage to be reimbursed by a company and deducted from your taxable income. And you can find those provisions at www.irs.gov. The current rate for mileage is 54 cents per mile, and we did confirm that. I think it did change. It actually went down a little bit from where it had been. The current rate for medical or moving purposes is 19 cents per mile. The current rate for in the service of a charitable organization is 14 cents per mile. In general, this section of the policy should state the allowable deduction as provided by the Internal Revenue Service. Some companies choose to give the employee a gas card for the purchase of gas and let the employee keep up with the number of miles that they drive. The difference in the amount of gas paid by the company and the mileage allowance amount over the gas paid by the company is a deduction on the employee's personal tax return. And for some people who travel frequently, this can definitely add up to a very nice deduction, that is a benefit for you. This section should be specific to the company's allowances, and the policy's allowances should be verified by the proper licensed professional.
Cecile, should you let your insurance company know that you're driving your automobile for work?
Yes, and I think if you will look at most of your, what do you call those sheets, the deck sheets that they send you for insurance, they will ask you, and that is something that you definitely want to be covered on, is to make sure that you let your insurance company know if you're using your personal vehicle for work basis.
And do most companies not only give the mileage reimbursement, but do they provide gas cards or anything, or is that all part of this reimbursement?
Let's see. If you have a company vehicle, obviously all your expenses are paid for by the company. You get your gas through the company. They can give you a gas card that's tied only to your organization. And it's something you got to be very careful about. If you provide those kinds of things, you have to have a definite trust level with your employees, and it's something that's extremely important that they understand specifically what it can and cannot be used for. So I urge caution with that policy. It's something that you want to make sure is as tight as you can possibly get it.
And I think in general, gas cards are larger companies and larger corporations. I think for small business purposes, the companies mostly prefer to just give the 54 cents a mile for the amount of time driven, because the IRS has all these rules. The mileage from your home to your office is not deductible, and then from your office to a meeting is, but from your office home is not. So I think that for small businesses, the 54 cents a mile reimbursement is the preferable allocation.
And can you put a time limit on how long ago that trip was that you put in that travel reimbursement? Because I can see there's
Yeah.
people that just,
Yeah, I would recommend that you consider doing that, because if you have someone who waits till the end of the year and then they throw in a big request for several $1,000s, you might not be equipped to handle that request at that time. So I would certainly recommend giving a time period of when they have to submit it.
I would actually, in that situation, I would actually put monthly, stipulation on reimbursements. I would not let them go past 30 days before they turned in their receipts. But, so let's go on, and we had a little glitch a few minutes ago, and live stream cut off. So this, we can email this to anybody that wants to send their email address to info@vhsbi.com. We can send the whole PowerPoint presentation for the portion of it that you missed. So the next section of your policies and procedures should have to do with conduct and work rules. And, you know, it's not possible to list all forms of behavior that you're gonna run into with the general public and your employees, but it's helpful to list possible infractions or general rules that may result in disciplinary action. And this is something that you can, you should continue to review annually to make sure that you've added things that have arisen during the year. So this section should address, but is not limited to, theft, lying, alcohol and drugs, fighting or violence, disruptive activity, negligence or conduct that results in damages, insubordination, safety, smoking, sexual or other types of harassment, firearms or other explosive materials, absenteeism, disclosure of business secrets or confidential information, violation of personnel policies, criminal activity, and unsatisfactory performance. That pretty much covers human behavior, but just as soon as I say that, some human will do something else that I've never seen or heard of before. So this section should be very specific about what the employer expects about the employee's behavior, because frankly, the employee is a representative of your company and is part of the public image of your company. So it is very important that you spell out the conduct and work ethic rules to let people know that what you are interested in is not only workplace conduct, but the image that your employees are projecting to the community about your business.
The next slide that we have, the following can be specific and described in further detail. These are areas that I think are extremely important that you must address in the personnel policy manual. The first one on the list, excuse me, is relative to attendance. You'd be surprised at the number of employees who don't have any clue of what's expected with their attendance. They think that if they need to be gone for something, that they just go, and nobody seems to have an interest in where they are and what they're doing and who's going to cover their duties while they're gone. So you want to be very clear about those kinds of things. The chain of command, this is something that I deal with in my job on a regular basis. I have employees call me. I'll have one a week that will say, I want to talk about my department head. And the problem with that is that employee needs to follow what we call a chain of command. And a lot of places, and we have one where you have an organizational chart that will be set up, and that person will know exactly who they need to go to next in order to vent a concern, a grievance, something like that. If you're just having a spat with your department head or your employee, make sure you go through the proper channels and speak to your department head, because that's the way that it's supposed to work. Now, if you can't resolve it at that level, obviously you go on up the chain of command. But that is something very important you want to stress to your employees. Use of electronic devices. This is getting to be more important every single day. Everybody's connected, and they're connected 5 or 6 different ways. So you want to be careful that your employees are not spending all their time on social networks, looking at their phones, their electronic devices, and not getting their work done. And unfortunately, there are people who have a hard time separating the two. Nepotism. Nepotism is when you are supervising or employing a family member or someone that you're related to by a blood relative or through marriage. We are very specific in our personnel policy about nepotism, and it's something that has been an issue for many organizations in the past. It's something that's extremely hard to deal with, and I encourage everybody to adopt a very specific nepotism policy of who can and cannot work for an organization. Now, one caveat to that, and let me just say this because we are a small town, nepotism puts a little bit of a crunch on us because we are a town of 8,300 people. Everybody knows everybody or is related to everybody, so sometimes this can get to be an issue when you have a small pool of applicants and you might have some folks who are related to someone. Computer and internet rules, including social media. Once again, this kind of falls into the same category with electronic devices. You want to make sure that your employees understand that they cannot be on social media all the time. And, if they're posting stuff and they're supposed to be working, I'll be the first one that gets a phone call to say, why is this person posting on Facebook at 2:30 in the afternoon when they're supposed to be at work? So you want to be very, very, very clear about that policy. Harassment, this is an all-encompassing thing. Harassment comes in many different categories. You want to be very clear about those categories and how they relate to your employees and what they should be looking for and knowledgeable of. And I think a lot of times it's important that you just make people aware of what kinds of harassment there are. Somebody may have had something happen to them and not even realize that it was a harassing thing. They just know it made them feel really bad. But you want to make sure you have that covered, and that includes sexual harassment, harassment based on some sort of orientation of some sort. So you want to be very careful about those and very specific. And the last is etiquette, and I think this is particularly interesting. We tend to lose our manners sometimes when we're at work, and I think that in the age of electronic devices, we just send stuff out, and you don't have that human interaction. And manners are something I hope never goes away. I think it's very important. Thank people for what they do. If you have just a brief interaction, make sure that you make it personal and mind your manners. And I think etiquette is something that office etiquette especially. If I'm on the phone at my desk, don't come and hang over me while I'm on the phone. If you can just wait in another part of my office or out in the hallway, I would really appreciate that while I finish conducting my business, and then we'll have our conversation. You would believe the number of people who don't have office etiquette, and it is something that can be extremely frustrating at times. So I really like that one.
Cecile, back to electronic devices.
Yes.
I see more and more businesses are encouraging, a way to cut costs is encouraging their employees to bring their own device and use that in their work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you suggest they put some kind of part in their policy about what you can do, what you can access from that device? I guess IT has to approve so much, but I can see that more and more. I know even the state has offered that if you want to use your own device, they'll pay a percentage of that,
Right.
but you're limited on what you can access.
Right, and that's actually a question I just dealt with this morning before I came over here. Had an employee who is using her personal cell phone, for example, to conduct town business, but she doesn't want to get a town-issued cell phone, which we would be willing to provide to her, but she has all these contacts and all these things that she doesn't want to lose, and she doesn't want to lose her number. And I understand that because she's very connected and deals with these kinds of things all the time. So we provide a stipend for someone based on their plan, and we're able to compensate them for that, but they have to turn in their, a copy of what their plan looks like for their cell phone to verify the number and keep all that current. And she is only to conduct town business during the day when she's at work. So that's
But that's
policy.
something though that should be included for all businesses
sure.
and organizations,
Yeah.
including their.
Yeah, very definitely. You want to do the next?
So the other topics that are kind of important to include, and a lot of these are state law, is jury duty and military leave, and you can find that at departmentoflabor.gov. If someone's had criminal charges, how do you conduct? How does that affect their job while they are waiting for their fair trial? If they've had criminal convictions, do you have a policy about misdemeanors and DUIs and felonies? Gifts and gratuities, for instance, the policy may state that the employee is responsible for reporting gratuities, which are taxable per the IRS code. And gratuities are a huge issue with food service businesses. Their wages are allowed to be much lower, paid by the employer. And so, you know, it's the employee's responsibility to report their tips for two reasons. One, for it to be taxable, and two, to make sure they're making at least minimum wage through their tips. And so, you know, that is that's kind of a double-edged sword on that one. There's not a lot of ways to monitor that if people are paying cash. So there's got to be, again, there's got to be some trust and some honesty between the employer and the employee.
All right, next, we're gonna talk about computers and internet usage, and this is something that I think most employers have dealt with from time to time when it comes to employees who might be spending, you know, who obviously have to have internet access to do their jobs on a daily basis, but could get carried away and be on the internet pretty much all the time. This section should describe the definition of the internet, define expected ownership of electronic communication, discuss prohibited language, allowed use of the company computer, unauthorized use of the company computer, and internet and actions that will result in disciplinary action being taken against an employee. You want to consult with the Department of Labor website for allowable language and confirm this with an attorney. And this is something that I can't say that it's fairly new, but because of the internet and how we all use it now to do our jobs much more frequently, this becomes a bigger issue. And there are things that you are not supposed to do on the internet while you're at work. Those are unauthorized things. You would think that those would be obvious, but I can tell you right now, I get questions all the time about, you know, what's happened. And at the town, we have an IT group that polices this for us. We have to do that because we have employees who, you know, from time to time might have gone astray and be looking at some things that they're not supposed to be looking at. Now, we have an ability to block those things. Not all organizations want to take that step, but it's something, you know, that we chose to do. So they're not allowed to, you know, to view certain things, or a message will pop up and tell them. You just hope that they know that before they get started. But it is something that you want to go over with employees through the year, just to remind them about the things that they're not supposed to be using their internet for at work.
So, on with communication, electronic and telephone, and again, this section should address the electronic equipment provided by the company and the use of personal cell phones and personal electronic equipment, which was Sandy's question a few minutes ago. Now, I have not Googled this, I will admit, but our Human Resource Director told us that you can Google BYOD, which stands for Bring Your Own Device, and it will actually give you the guidelines to how to incorporate that into your company policies. So social media posting should be addressed in this, and you know, social media is more than just Facebook. It's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's LinkedIn, and does your company allow LinkedIn, since that's a business connection website? And you know, do you allow people to post from different departments for Facebook marketing, or do you have one person that's doing that? So those things are extremely important to address. I would suggest that if you have one or two or five, for that matter, people who are maybe monitoring each different kind of social media, whether it be Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, I would suggest that you start out with a meeting of all of these people, and again, make sure that they understand that this is your company's image that they are putting on this social media site, and make sure that they understand your expectations of what they are posting. And I have to say, including what they post on their own personal pages, because once they become your employee, they are a representative of your company, whether you like it or not. And in small towns, that makes a much bigger difference than it does in larger cities.
I will just add to that, when I do social media workshops, I encourage if a business, whether 3 people in the business or, 1,000 people, you need to at least encourage a couple of your employees to help you with social media, but they need to meet. They need to either have, quarterly or monthly meetings just to get together. Okay, we've got these events coming up. This is what I want to do. That could even include YouTube or, Instagram and so forth. But from a small business, the more you can get out there, the better. But you have to keep some kind of control. You can't just say, XYZ employee, you can do this. And when something's out there and it surprises you, you're the one that's responsible. It's not necessarily the employee, but you basically put that in place. And if you don't have that as part of your policies and procedures, you don't really have a whole lot to go back to them.
That's right.
Right.
Very true.
After the fact is always going to be a huge issue, because if you let somebody start a bad habit, it's really hard to break it. And if you just turn your head because it's not really that bad, I can guarantee you that other employees will start doing it. It happens every single time. So, and you said something about quarterly meetings that came to my mind. If you're, and I know that everybody operates differently, so this is purely an opinion of my own, but if you're having a meeting and your key people are not all included in that meeting, you're going to create hard feelings. You're going to create a situation where everybody's not on the same page, and you're going to spend all of your time and energy trying to monitor the information that's going between all of them. So the very best thing you can do in any work environment, whether it's small or large, is if you've got, department heads or key people that are supervising or doing certain jobs, when you have a meeting about your company and about what's going on for the month or the quarter or the year, you should include everybody that is responsible for carrying out a duty. And so and I'm just going to use an example. I don't, of course, work for the town, but here at the Incubator, any meeting that I'm involved in that has to do with what we're going to do for the future plans, we keep Jennifer involved in that. Jennifer's involved in all of our planning sessions. She's involved in all of the things that we do. She may not have a say or an input, but she's got all the information of where we're going, why we're going that direction, and how we're going to get there.
Well said. I think we'll move on. Our next issue that we want to deal with, and it's just, I think, 2 sentences on the slide as far as attendance in detail, but you can't believe how important this actually is. It spells out the procedure each employee is expected to follow as it relates to absenteeism and tardiness. It also spells out the procedures for discipline. And this is a question that I get on a weekly, if not daily basis. We've got a department head who calls and says, look, I've got this guy, he's having problems in his personal life, he's late coming to work, or he's missed 3 days, or, he thinks he's got a cold, so he stayed home for a week. I mean, you've got all these different scenarios that people are facing in their lives. But the most important thing I think people forget, that you have to remember, and people do tend to forget, is that if you're gone and you're not in your position, somebody's having to cover your work for you, and that creates a hardship on your entire department. So you want to remember that your attendance to be there is very important. Now, if you're sick and you're running a fever, stay at home. Don't share it with everybody at your office. They will really thank you for that. But attendance is something that speaks highly, and I know if I get a job reference call about someone who has worked for the town and is now moved away and is applying for another position, one of the very first questions that they're going to ask me is how regular was their attendance, because that is something that is a good thing to be able to say about somebody as a job reference. They were at work every day, they understood their responsibility, and they did not, put their department in a bad situation because they weren't able to get to work every day. And I think you also want to make sure that, put some guidelines out there about notifying people. I send an email to everybody on my floor if I'm not going to be in the office, because somebody needs to know where I am, and not everybody has access to my calendar. If I leave and have to be out of the office for several days, I will email several groups of people to let them know that I'm not going to be there. And it's not because I think I'm so important, it's just that, people need to know where you are and, if they do need to get a hold of you. And I think everybody's important. I think this is something that stands for every level of employee. So attendance is extremely important, and they also need to know that from the procedure for discipline, if they are having problems getting to work or being tardy, that there are steps in place that they will have to follow, and if they don't correct those, they will, could possibly not have a job anymore.
And do you put anything in your policies and procedures about inclement weather, like if we have 3 snowflakes before they leave home in the mornings, they decide they're going to call in? I mean, some people use any excuse, and do you include that in?
I can't tell you right off that we have an inclement weather policy. It's pretty much based, because our departments are so diverse in the town, that it's based on, particular departments or buildings. I know at the 3rd floor, at the town hall, we don't want anybody to risk their life trying to get to work with snow, bad weather, if they live, further out than others do. We just leave it up to the person to use their own best judgment, if they can get to work or not. And I think it's
But they have to use that as a vacation.
Yes, they would have to use it as a day.
Yes, it's not like a excused or.
Exactly, yeah. Now, if we have only closed town hall, I think twice in the 10 years that I've worked for the town. And one time we had an electrical outage and we had no power, and it was like 10 degrees outside, so we had to send everybody home just because the pipes were freezing, and it was just a terrible situation. But, we do take precautions with those kinds of things, and yes, people do understand. Now, if we send someone home early, that's our deal. But if they have to miss a day because they can't get in, then yes, they would have to take a leave day.
The thing about, and before we go on, the thing about the policy as to whether or not you're going to allow people to not come to work if it's bad weather, if you take on the responsibility of saying no matter what you have to get here, and they have an accident or they hurt themselves, that's your liability. So you have to be very, very careful about what you put in these policies, because some of these policies could become a liability, especially inclement weather policies.
I think the biggest thing is that isn't excused or unexcused, and you let them know up front, if you're not able to get here, you're going to have to use a personal day or sick day.
Right. Now I'm going to let Cecile talk about the chain of command, because I think they deal with that more than we do.
The chain of command is I think I mentioned earlier, this is something that, I deal with on a regular basis in my position. This is a grievance portion of the company policy and describes the manner in which a disagreement can be resolved. Grievance policies are usually omitted for small employers. However, there should be a policy in place in which the employer treats all of the employees the same. For an example, missing work every Friday or missing work the day before or after a holiday. That can be an issue that you have to deal with, and you have to follow the chain of command. Corrective action should be clear and concise and included in the company's policies and procedures. And I think I mentioned earlier, and something that I highly recommend is a organizational chart for your business. If you have more than, say, 10, 15 employees, I think it would be beneficial, because if you have someone, as I said earlier, who has a problem, you don't want them to come jumping over the department head, right to management to find out, so that they can vent about this person. And a lot of times that's where chain of command gets abused. People are, upset with the department head, so they want to vent about that person. Well, you're not giving that department head a chance to resolve the issue before it gets out of hand. And I think everybody deserves that chance. So, following the chain of command is an extremely important thing. Does anybody have a question? No? Okay. Personnel records. You want me to do this one? Personnel records are interesting things. They can get you into a lot of trouble, or they can really save you in a bad situation. You want to use this section to discuss personnel records required for the employer's purpose and include an information update policy. It can be as simple as saying it is the employee's responsibility to periodically update his or her personnel information. It is generally a good idea to set a date, January 1st and or July 1st of each year, to give the employee a copy of the information the employer has on file and ask for the employee to review and update their information. It is helpful to give a deadline for the employee to return the correct information. This is particularly important this time of year because it's when we send out W-2 information. We're putting all those documents together for tax purposes. If your address has changed, if you've gotten married and now you have a new last name, if you have a child that is no longer a dependent and you need to review your tax situation, these are the times that you need to update that information, and it is the employee's responsibility. I mean, if you're in human resources, you have no way of knowing what something could have happened that have caused a change with this. So you want to make sure that your records are up to date, and it is incumbent upon the employee to do that. I recently moved and have gone through a process of getting my address changed and doing all that kind of thing. But it's important that your employee know what your most current address and status and all that stuff is. You should also state that personnel records are confidential and accessible by the employee and the human resource person and the human resource director's direct supervisor. Medical records are protected by HIPAA and can only be accessed through court order or by the employee. Now, one thing I would say about this, we require at the town that all personnel records be in a locked cabinet, and the only person that has that key is our director of human resources. I could get a hold of that if I needed to, but the process we have put into place is to go just through our human resource director to access that information, because there's some things you find in employee files that are extremely confidential, and you do not want to have someone that's outside of that department to have access to that information. That is extremely, I can't stress enough how important that is, especially with HIPAA and medical records. You have someone in a workers' comp situation, you will find medical records and all those kinds of things that are part of that person's personnel file. Now, one thing I think a lot of employees don't realize is that you are, as an employee, you're allowed to see the contents of your personnel file. You can come and ask to see your file anytime. We have to provide you that access. You just can't remove the file from the office. Now, if I get a subpoena from an attorney that says they need to see that personnel file, I would have to answer that subpoena and provide them that information. But we can redact certain things that would deal with medical issues and those kinds of things, so that they can't have that information unless it pertains directly to their particular case. The next thing, come on. All right, garnishment. Garnishment is an ugly word, but it's a necessary word. This is a section where you establish a policy that states how the company feels about this type of court order. Garnishments require federal and state compliance on behalf of the employer. Your policy can define when a garnishment is considered a nuisance. State statute section 34-29 of the Code of Virginia refers to section 206A1 of Title 29 of the U.S. Code as the applicable law for garnishment. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a garnishment? A garnishment is when you owe money to someone and they have gone through a court process to collect that money. And an actual paper signed by a judge will come to our Human Resources Department, and we will be obliged to deduct a certain amount of money according to this piece of paper to satisfy this garnishment. The employee never touches it, never sees it, they just know it's getting deducted out of their paycheck. But we are only able to do a garnishment through an approved, authorized court order. And most of the time people get garnishments when they have bills that haven't been paid. The most often thing that we see is medical bills. If you owe the hospital money and you weren't able to pay your bill, the hospital can go to court and get a judgment against you for the amount, and then they figure out how much they can request information on your salary, and then it's deducted on a formula. And every time you get paid, a certain amount of money will be deducted until that amount has been satisfied. The other thing you see garnishments for, unfortunately, is child support. You have people who have their child support ordered through a court, and to make sure that the person gets paid, that garnishment is deducted, that amount of child support is deducted from their check and sent directly to the Division of Support Enforcement, so that they get it directly to the benefit of the child. So those are the most often things that you see with garnishments.
Okay, and
You
so,
can do this one.
yeah, we can do this one, confidentiality and as business ethics. So this is an opportunity for you, the employer, to describe in detail the company's expectations on these two topics, and we've kind of brushed over this a little bit as far as your image of you know, the company's image being projected by your activities. So, both of the terms should be defined and expounded upon. If you are doubtful, or if you have questions about whether or not you're allowed to put these kinds of things in your policies, you can always refer to the Department of Labor again. You should have that on speed dial or on speed search, which is the dol.gov, because they are very specific about some of the things you can and cannot request or require of an employee. But frankly, it just makes common sense that if you, especially in a small business, if you are a valued employee that holds the secrets or even the activities of the day in confidence, and you're not out, you know, spreading the word or saying something about your employer, you know, if you are somebody that is treating that business as if it were your business and treating the information as if it were information that's being said about you, you will become quickly one of the most valued employees in the company, because that is very hard to find. It gains you trust with your employer immediately. So this happens on a regular basis, and it's kind of a catch-22. Your company may be small enough that the wages you pay aren't quite enough for that person to, you know, to not have to seek outside employment. So this has to be something that you need to think about very carefully when you're setting wages and when you're trying to make decisions on whether or not you feel like outside employment is going to interfere with your employee's current job. So you need to define what a conflict of interest is in that policy, and you need to address the company's expectations of an employee who has a second job. And, you know, depending on the type of company, this can really be a big conundrum, because if the employee is a public safety or public health, somebody that's in charge of health, safety, and welfare, do you really want a exhausted employee to be in charge of that, you know, at your company? So those are, you know, there are some businesses that's not going to make a huge big difference, but there are some businesses that it will make a very big difference and a very big impact. One of our favorite business challenge competitors is a company that does outdoor rafting and, you know, adventure, if you will. And, you know, I could see that for them being something that they'd have to really give some great thought to, because do you want your people who are, you know, overseeing hikes and rafting and whatever to have been out past 2 in the morning the night before, and then they've got your clients in a raft and they're so tired they're not paying attention and somebody has an accident. So it's really more important than it appears to be on the surface. So outside employment is a really good thing to think about and consider when you're writing your policies.
And I'll make one final comment on that. One issue that we've had with the town is we've had people who have taken second jobs in the past. The problem is that they would compromise their full-time job with the town in order to do this, by wanting to leave work early so that they could get to their other job and compromising the schedule that, you know, was already set. So if you're thinking about taking a second job, you want to be very careful, and I would encourage people to definitely talk to your department head and say, look, I'm having trouble making ends meet. I'd really like to take this second job, but I would have them assure me that it will not impact their current position. That's always a good idea, and just have that dialogue with your department head so that they know that you are considering doing this. That way it's out in the open. Confidentiality and business ethics. Let's see, we're moving on to page 1, paying benefits. I think I missed one. I apologize. All right, paying benefits. Wow, is this important? Everybody wants to get paid, and everybody wants to know if they have benefits and what those are and what they're entitled to. This section should identify the employee pay rate, the overtime policy, and the compensatory time policy. Employers should have posted the federal employment wage and overtime guidelines. And once again, your Department of Labor site can definitely, point you in the right direction with this. If you're ever in the town hall, pardon me, you will see posters, I think on every floor in our building, that tell what the current minimum wage is and, what people, the minimum that people are entitled to make per hour. That's a section that is extremely important because everybody wants to get paid. And at the town, we have several different types of benefits in the forms of health insurance and Virginia retirement system, and leave time accruals and holiday schedule. And employees need to know up front what all those things are. It's extremely important. This gives you compensatory time with the town is a definitely an important issue. Leave, whether it's paid, unpaid, or sick, you need to define that. You need to define your holiday schedule. If you observe certain holidays during the year that your employees are not expected to report for work, you want to have that. And I know at the town, every year I think usually we know the last week of December, we send out a schedule of the state holidays for the employees that also denotes what the paydays are for the year and the holiday schedule. You want to have a military leave policy. This would be, an example would be if someone is in the National Guard and that person's been called to duty. There are provisions that you have to follow. That's an extremely important policy that you know what that is, because I know we've run into it several times with our employees. Court leave would be if you've been called to jury duty, I guess, is that one? Jury duty is something we all hope we never have to do, but I can guarantee it'll end up coming your way one way or the other. You can't just, if you get called for jury duty, you obviously have to respond. But, if you're going to be in a big trial and you're going to be taken away from your position for a month or 2 months, which is not always out of the realm of possibility, you're going to be leaving your department in some bad situations. So you want to have that dialogue if you get called for jury duty very quickly, and you want to have that policy set forth in your manual. Funeral and bereavement leave. I get more questions about this probably than anything. People lose a loved one. They're in obviously an emotional state. You want to set that policy very clearly, and as soon as you hear, we try to do this at the town, as soon as you hear that someone has lost a loved one, make them aware of what the policy says, because they are entitled to some time to grieve, and if they need additional time above and beyond that, we obviously require them to take their leave time. But there are things that come up when you lose a loved one that have to be handled, and they have to be handled rather quickly, and we try to be as sensitive as we can to that. Personal leave, this is kind of the catch-all thing. Hey, I need to be gone tomorrow. If you want to provide that leave, you can do that. At the town, it's basically broken out into vacation time and sick time. And personal leave would be something that you would have to provide for separately in your manual, and you want to be very specific about how many hours or days someone would get in a year's time. Leave for treatment of drug and alcohol abuse. This is something that you also have to be extremely sensitive to, because if you have someone who is struggling with a type of addiction, that doesn't make them a bad employee. It just makes them someone who needs some help. And if that person can get that help and get to, hopefully professional treatment for that, you want to be very sensitive to that, but you want to make your policy, again, very, very clear on what what is allowed and how much time and leave time and all those kinds of things that come into consideration. But once again, that's something that I urge everyone, keep that stuff as extremely confidential and keep as few people in the mix on that as you possibly can, because that's something, it's extremely important, but you also don't want to compromise your workforce if you have someone who is not currently fit to do their job. They could be endangering others and causing, problems in the department. So you have to be sensitive on both sides on that particular issue.
So I'm going to let Cecile do the next slide because it deals with workman's compensation, but I do want to say one thing before she does that. You will receive in the mail on a regular basis from private companies these things that look like they're invoices from the federal government that talks about posters. The federal government does not send you a bill or an offer to sell you a poster. So if you are getting those in the mail, you can buy them if you want to, but you don't have to, and you can actually download it on an 8x10 sheet of paper from the departmentoflabor.gov website. Again, posting. Those posters are just a sales technique from some private company.
And that piece of paper is just as valid as that big old fancy laminated poster that you could order and pay money for. So, the next is workman's compensation, and this is something that is obviously a very important thing to employees. If a company has 3 or more full or part-time employees in Virginia and 5 in Tennessee, then you're required to carry workman's compensation insurance. The Workman's Compensation Act spells out the guidelines. Virginia law requires that an employer who regularly employs more than 2 part-time or full-time employees carry this workers' compensation insurance. If a business hires subcontractors to perform the same trade, business, or occupation, or to fulfill a contract, the subcontractor's employees are included when determining the total number of employees for coverage requirements. Executive officers also count as employees. If the total number of all employees is more than 2, workers' compensation is required. This is extremely important, definitely has to be addressed in your personnel policy manual. I would encourage you, excuse me, if you have any issues with this or questions, you might want to seek legal advice on this, because it's something that can be extremely important to a small organization as well as it is to a large organization. We deal with workman's comp on a daily basis, and we also have jobs. If we have people who get hurt on the job, they expect to be taken care of, and this insurance provides for that. So you want to make sure that you have that. And then, at the town, we don't have many occasions to have subcontractors, but if we do on a job, they have to provide us proof of insurance, because they're going to be doing work on our property, which makes it a big issue.
I agree, and anybody that knows me very well knows that I am the insurance Nazi. I believe in insurance. So who is considered to be an employee? There's some checklists that you can go by, but basically, if you require someone to come to work at a certain time, to leave at a certain time, to take their vacation based on your yes or no, if you write their paycheck, people can say, "Oh no, she's self-employed. I just facilitate the money." That is incorrect. They are not self-employed if you are just facilitating their money. So, again, contract wage earners are people who are self-employed. They pay their own Social Security taxes. That is at 15.3% instead of the 7.65 that your employer takes out of your paycheck. It's a huge difference. And again, if they are a contract wage earner, you absolutely need to make sure that they've got insurance, because if they are on your facility and they hurt themselves, you could have a huge liability issue. So one of the guiding factors, I guess, would say, is that control. And so control is basically defined as whether or not the employer controls or exercises the means and methods by which work is performed. And so, that's kind of the parameters that the IRS and the Employment Commission decide when they're trying to decide if you're a contract wage earner or if you are an employee. That is given the greatest weight in those decisions. If injury indicates that control is exercised over the worker should likely be counted as an employee for coverage purposes. Again, that's part of the Department of Labor standards, and I know we keep saying that, but It is so easy to write policies and procedures if you will just go to that website and take a look at, you know, what those topics are. So what we're giving you is a guideline of topics, but you can take a look at those topics, and if you have something in your mind that you do or don't want your employees to do, it's generally on that website. Again, I've said that people who control their own time, when they're going to come and do work for you, what the type of work is, how much they're going to get paid, they are the contract wage earners. And if they've got a small business, federal ID number, sole proprietors are harder to do business with because you do have to get their insurance certificates. But for instance, let's say I hire somebody to paint and they have an LLC. Well, most LLCs already have to have insurance. So, you know, you don't have to be quite as worried about LLCs and subchapter S and corporate comfort systems, for instance, that as you do if you are having a self-employed person who is just a sole proprietor come into your place of business.
All right, the benefit program. This section should spell out the type of employee benefits the company offers for full-time, part-time, seasonal, and temporary employees. The Department of Labor Standards and the IRS has some guidelines that must be followed. 50 or more employees triggers the company to comply with the Affordable Care Act. And I can tell you that this particular issue has become so important for the town and for every business over 50 employees that I have had conversations with. Navigating this particular area is extremely difficult. It's complicated, and it requires a lot of attention to detail to make sure that you're covering everything. You want to be very specific, or as specific as you possibly can in your employee manual about what benefit programs you do offer for full-time, part-time, seasonal, and temporary employees. And you know, you may think that you don't have anybody that fits into the seasonal or temporary category. Those are extremely hard to define. You know, I know for the town we have all 4 of these levels of employees, and there are different things that apply to each different section. So it's based on the number of hours that someone works. There is a maximum number of hours that someone can work according to the Affordable Care Act. If they work over so many hours, I think it's 30 now, you have to provide health insurance. You want to be extremely, extremely careful about this act and what it means for your organization. There are lots of resources that you can go to for this online, and also seminars that you can attend. And this is something that needs to be updated on a regular basis in your personnel policy manual. Benefits don't really change that much for town employees, but they do for other categories of employees. Full-time, you don't have a lot of variation, but part-time, seasonal, and temporary you definitely do as the Affordable Care Act evolves and changes and those kinds of things. So this is obviously something that's extremely important. Now, once you have, is this our last one? No. Once you have developed your company policies and procedures, have them reviewed by an attorney. And I think Cathy would agree that we can't stress this one enough. We have a town attorney who has been involved in several rewrites of our personnel policy, and she is crucial to, you know, how things are organized, how they're worded, and to make sure that we're following the law, which is the most important thing. As we stated earlier, no policy's perfect, I can tell you that, but you can get pretty close. And you know, if you want to look at how other people do things, I know the town posts their policy online, so any employee can access it, but also the public can access it to see what it looks like. And you just want to make sure that if you have resources to hire an attorney to review yours, I definitely encourage you to do that, because they may find something that you've worded on your own that could get you into a lot of trouble. And there are plenty of areas in one of these manuals that could possibly get you into trouble.
Cecile, would it be to the benefit of a small business owner that if you do have company policies and you do have that employee review them, that they sign off on those and you put them in their file?
Yes, we keep that piece of paper when we do onboarding, when we bring someone in as a new employee, new hire, we have them sign that they have received a copy of the personnel policy manual, and then we also make them aware that it's online for them to access anytime that they need to. And we do have that piece of paper, and then if we do a rewrite and we send out a new policy, we have everybody that gets issued to sign again to know that they've gotten all of the changes that might be made. So I definitely encourage you to do that and make sure that you have that so that you can document, should it ever arise, that this person was provided the policy manual and they can't say that they weren't aware that this was a policy that the town had. You always want to give each employee a copy, and I know I've had 3 or 4 copies of our personnel policy since I've been with the town, and I put dates on them, but I keep them because that way I can go back and look if I need to, if I'm unsure about a change or something like that. But your human resource officer should always have an updated copy ready to hand out at a moment's notice. I always encourage that. You want to have them sign and date the document and have them acknowledge that they've received it and that they understand it, and keep this document with their personnel file. I know our human resources director is very good about telling people if you have questions or something, her door's always open. That's her policy. And if you have a simple question or something really complicated, talk to her and run by there and ask her a question. She'll always be available to help you. And then if she's not, she'll find the answer. So I hope that like I said, these documents are changing all the time. They're frustrating in that way, but it's kind of good because it keeps it fresh and it keeps you on your toes. And you just want to make sure that people are always familiar with with what's in your policy manual. And as we said before, it's as important for the employer as it is for the employee. Do we have any other questions from anybody?
No, I think that, Sandy, will you tell us, why don't you come up and talk about our next classes? Thank you all. I know it's snowing. We've had several people online who had signed up to be live and in person, and the weather report, all you have to do to get it to snow is have me as one of your speakers, and it'll snow every time. So Sandy's going to tell you about our next classes, and thank you for tuning in.
Our next class will be on February the 3rd. That is QuickBooks Online. So hope you can tune in for that. We actually have a CPA across the street at Spiegel Blevins that's going to be doing that. I also will mention for those that may be local that are looking at starting a business or maybe working on a marketing plan or procedures and so forth. Also on the 3rd, all day here at the Incubator will be a representative with the U.S. Census Bureau that will be providing one-on-one counseling to show you how to extract data from the Census Bureau that can help you in, again, from everything from a marketing to a business plan and so forth. Also, starting next Tuesday here from 6 p.m. to 8:30 at night, we are starting our 2016 Washington County Business Challenge. We have over $35,000 that we are going to be awarding to new startups and existing businesses that are located in Washington County, the town of Abingdon, Damascus, and Glade Spring. We're excited about that. But for 6 weeks, each Tuesday evening, we're going to be doing workshops from everything from how do you start a new business. We're going to have professionals in CPA, attorneys, insurance that's going to be able to answer questions. We're going to even have a session that we're going to have folks from financial institutions to talk about what they look for in reviewing business plans and applications. We have a session on marketing a business, credit, and so forth, management. And then the final night will be, they'll be doing kind of like a Shark Tank. They're going to be pitching their business idea and see if it floats, and as well as submitting a business plan. So some great things are happening in not only Washington County, but here at the Incubator. This is helping this county and the region expand, and I appreciate you tuning in today. So thanks again, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us.
Okie dokie, we'll be on YouTube soon.